Welcome to the Boring Channel, where sleep begins. Subscribe for more boring documentaries narrated to help you relax, rest, and fall asleep. By mid-morning, villagers dispersed to labor. Women clucked over washing stones at the communal spring, beating linen until it softened in cold water, while young girls fetched pails from the well, their arms strong from repeated trips up and down the sunken well shaft. At the same time, men flattened clay on wooden boards, forming clay roof tiles or bricks for the next cottage chimney, and blacksmiths stoked bellows in open forge workshops, hammering glowing iron into nails, horseshoes, and tools that would serve the community for years. Every task required practiced skill. Every motion followed a well-worn pattern, yet the repetition offered a steady comfort, a sense that the world's order remained intact. The arched doorways of humble chapels opened onto stone-paved yards where bells tolled the Angelus at midday and evening prayers at dusk. These resonant peals reminded villagers of their place in a cosmos ruled by both merciless seasons and benevolent saints. The church, draped in evergreens on feast days, served as more than a house of worship. It was a social center, the backdrop for weddings, christenings, and even markets. Of barter where surplus eggs or spun wool exchanged hands under vaulted ceilings. Amid the hum of voices and the scent of burning incense, life unfolded in a tapestry of rituals and rites, each day weaving villagers more tightly into a shared fate. As twilight descended, the horizon blushed with soft pinks and grays. Candles of tallow and beeswax flickered in shuttered windows, casting a warm glow across compact rooms. Inside, families gathered around the hearth, the heart of every cottage, where steamy bowls of pottage simmered, and children listened intently to tales of wandering saints, distant kingdoms, or heroic hunts. Elders, their faces etched by the sun and wind, spoke in measured tones, pausing for effect with the deliberate beats of a storyteller. These evening gatherings, bathed in amber light and whispered confidences, drew the day to a close in gentle repose. Outside, only the rustle of night creatures and the faint murmur of wind through hedgerows punctuated the hush. In those long nights, one might glimpse glowing embers through narrow windows and hear the soft scrape of spinning wheels tracking yarn by hearthside. The loom in the corner clacked steadily as women transformed flax into linen, each shuttle strike a metronome marking progress toward garments that would clothe infants and adults alike. The rhythmic cadence of domestic chores lulled tired minds, carrying them toward dreams framed by lullabies and ancient lull. In the rural dark, life felt cocooned, protected from the unknown by stout doors and familiar faces. Despite the surface calm, the medieval world brimmed with latent anxieties. Harsh winters frequently starved granaries. Droughts cracked fields baked by relentless sun. Invasions and bandit raids loomed at the edges of frontier regions. Rumors of brigands hiding in woodlands or of wolves prowling too close to hamlets sharpened vigilance. Superstitious fear found expression in shared beliefs. An unusual alignment of planets predicted doom. A fiery comet meant plague. A solar eclipse foreshadowed war or famine. Every unusual phenomenon in sky or soil carried weighty meaning, interpreted by learned monks in monastic scriptoria, by itinerant astrologers plotting charts under shaded lattices, or by simple laborers who stared upward for answers in the constellations. Then came a whisper of decay riding on caravans across endless steppes, a quiet evil spreading beneath bolts of silk, among sacks of spices, and within dusty crates of precious metals. The Black Death, as it would be called, announced itself not with thunderous catastrophe, but with a faint, almost unnoticed tremor in the flow of daily life. In those first uncertain days, coughs in a single household passed for common illness, fevers for seasonal chills, and swollen groins for a spider's bite gone awry. Yet soon, as bodies fell ill in neighboring homes, as burials multiplied beyond the reach of parish gravediggers, the subtle tremor grew into an unstoppable quake. Far to the east, in the boundless grasslands of Central Asia, nomadic tribes lived on horseback in portable felt yurts. They guided herds of sheep, cattle, and camels, moving like living rivers in pursuit of pasture and water. Along these routes ran the arteries of the Silk Road, a vast network of trails, mountain passes, and river fords stretching thousands of miles from Xi'an to Constantinople. Caravans plodded slowly, each merchant caravan a microcosm of cultures. Persian traders bartered for Han silks. Arab merchants offered frankincense and myrrh. Venetian envoys paid in coin for exotic dyes. Camels with serrated lips chewed thorny shrubs, their calloused pads treading arid plateaus. Horses galloped along date-lined oases, and riders carried caravans' hopes and fears into each trading post. Between oases, the wind carved swirling dunes, burying old way stations beneath golden sands. In that shifting silence, fleas hopped from rat to rat, feast to feast, hitching unseen journeys along dusty paths. When a caravan paused to rest at an emerald oasis, mice danced around spilled grain, and rats followed suit, drawn by kernels that glinted like gems under lamplight. No one sensed the poison they carried, the tiny fangs poised to infect the unwitting. The traders marveled at the aroma of saffron and cinnamon, the softness of brocaded velvet, and the gleaming sheen of Chinese porcelain, blind to the scourge lurking within the weave of a tapestry or the lining of a bale of muslin. By 1346, the plague had reached the Crimean coast at Kaffa, a thriving Genoese colony and gateway between Europe and Asia. The Mongol army, mired in a protracted siege under high stone walls, teetered on despair as plague thinned their ranks. In desperation, some chroniclers claim they resorted to catapulting their own dead into the besieged city, a grotesque weapon of war that turned corpses into contagion. The stench of rotting flesh and the ghastly sight of carrion raining on crowded streets shattered Kaffa's defenses. Whether new infections occurred from direct contact or through rats fleeing walled enclosures, the outcome was the same. The Black Death burst its first castle gates. As Genoese merchants retreated, they loaded ships bound for Mediterranean ports. Sicily braced for impact when the first vessels glided into Palermo's harbor, their decks crowded with unburied dead and half-dressed survivors. Marseille and Genoa saw similar arrivals. Billowing sails and labyrinthine quays became stages for horror. Merchant houses that once glittered with wealth now displayed banners leniently to quarantine ships. Officials read notices in 3 languages, Italian, French, and Latin, warning captains to wait 40 days before disembarking. Yet traders, eager to unload precious cargo, bribed guards or sneaked ashore under cover of night, carrying plague in their boots and cloaks. Within weeks, the contagion fanned across Italy's sun-drenched hills. Florence's marble palaces echoed with lamentations. Sienna's red brick towers stood silent, and Venice's canals mirrored floating corpses. From there, the plague poured over the Alps, slipping through mountain passes into France. In towns like Avignon, where popes held court, corridors once humming with political intrigue, filled with sick courtiers and pallbearers in black robes. By autumn, The fevered tide swept northward along Rhine River towns, down dusty Roman roads to Spain's southern reaches, and westward across the Channel to England's green pastures. Medieval medicine, bound by ancient humoral theory, offered scant hope. Physicians donned leather robes coated in wax, affixing beaked masks filled with dried rose petals, garlic, and vinegar-soaked sponges, their protective perfumes believed to banish foul airs. Armed with wooden staves to probe with distance, they prodded patients' swollen buboes, lumps of poison-swollen lymph nodes, as if gauging the depth of an unseen wound. The stench within those feathery masks must have been ghastly, a mix of blood, pus, and noxious herbs, both comforting and repelling in equal measure. Bloodletting cupped red pools from veins, expulsing life's essence to restore imaginary balance. Boil lancing slit open buboes to drain their foul contents. Each desperate remedy gushed more suffering, for iron tools and crude blades invited secondary infections. Symptoms arrived in silent procession. First, a dull ache behind the eyes, then a fever that bloomed beneath the skin like fire, chills that rattled teeth, sweats that drenched nightshirts. By the second day, disorientation claimed minds. Patients drifted between delirium and despair. Swollen glands, underarms, groin, neck grew hard as stones, aching with every heartbeat. Their overlying skin blackened as veins ruptured and tissues decayed, staining cloth with ominous hues. This frightful discoloration gave the plague its common name, Black Death. Violent vomiting of blood from lungs and stomachs presaged collapse. Some convulsed in frenzied horror, while others curled into fetal positions, murmuring prayers they barely remembered. Death was swift and merciless. In many places, 40% to 60% of villagers perished within weeks. Entire households reduced to ghost towns. Doors were bricked up, windows shuttered. Once familiar streets belonged only to rats, vermin untroubled by quarantine. Bell towers tolled ceaselessly, each peal a dirge for another soul claimed by the scourge. But soon even gravediggers succumbed, riven by fatigue and infection, leaving corpses unburied under muddy floors or floating in canals. Mass graves yawned in fields beyond city walls, pits hewn hastily by terrified conscripts and covered with quicklime to hasten decay. Pale figures in hooded cloaks shoveled body upon body, layering them in anonymous heaps. No names were recorded, no prayers uttered, just a vast, echoing silence. In the midst of ruin, surviving civic leaders enacted extraordinary measures. Quarantines hardened into law. Ships and travelers faced strict isolation. Flags bearing a black cross flew above gates, guarded by watchmen who carried wooden staves, ready to push away anyone who dared approach. Town charters were amended to include guidelines on corpse disposal, highway cleaning, and market closures. Yet enforcement was uneven, and fear provoked panic more often than obedience. Some fled to walled monasteries. Others boarded overloaded vessels bound for distant lands. The flight of the wealthy left commons derelict, impoverished families attempting to bury kin with scant tools, or none at all. As infection overwhelmed urban centers, nobles and merchants retreated to countryside villas and monasteries, erecting barriers against rumors of plague. They barred their gates, posted guards, and shuttered windows. Yet a single rat scuttling through a barn, a contaminated cartwheel rolling across threshold, or a visiting servant carrying a damp bundle of laundry could render their defenses moot. King Alfonso XI of Castile fell ill in a well-guarded palace. Queen Joan of England expired in the cold hush of her royal chamber. And even Pope Clement VI, ensconced in Avignon's papal palace, survived only by ordering torches to burn all around his rooms, convinced that smoke could cleanse the air of pestilence. In rural villages, superstition rippled through fields and forests. Folk remedies burgeoned. Bunches of rosemary and rue hung in windows, garlic-stuffed satchels swung from belts, and bowls of vinegar sat at thresholds to catch bad air. Coins stamped with crosses were buried beneath doorposts. Charred sandalwood was burnt on hearths. Villagers whispered charms against the evil wind, while others smeared excrement on fences to repel spirits. Cats, long associated with witchcraft, were brutally slaughtered, leaving rodent populations to spiral. In the absence of cats' natural predation, rat numbers exploded, along with plagues further spread. Such tragically misguided acts underscored humanity's helplessness before an invisible foe. Yet amid despair, stories of compassion flickered like stars in a moonless night. Women tended the sick in secret cellars, offering sips of broth or rubbing cool water onto fevered brows. Monks and nuns converted convents into makeshift infirmaries, despite scant bedding and meager medical knowledge. Some individuals risked their own safety to bury the dead, wrapping bodies in linen before laying them gently into mass graves. Parish priests, their voices cracked by sorrow, celebrated clandestine services at dawn for dying congregants, administering last rites through cracked doors. In every place, fear battled with solidarity, and small acts of kindness became miracles to those left behind. When the first wave finally ebbed after 2 torrid years, survivors emerged into a world irrevocably altered. Churches stood empty or half ruined, their stone crosses battered by weather and neglect. Fields grew wild with brambles, orchards lay untended, fruit rotting on gnarled branches. Yet the sun continued its arc. Crops still budded beneath hardy vines, and rivers rolled on, washing the sins of towns into the sea. Slowly, the living reclaimed their world. They reopened shuttered shops, coaxed crops into yielding new grain, hammered fresh nails into tattered rooftops. Labor was scarce, and those who remained found hidden power in their toil. Serfs who once toiled for subsistence negotiated wages for the first time. Wandering laborers demanded clothing and board. Even children old enough to swing scythes received coins for bending their backs. Feudal lords, desperate for hands to sow and reap, offered freedoms: the right to sell surplus grain, respite from labor dues, or permission to settle elsewhere. The medieval hierarchy wavered as peasantry discovered newfound bargaining chips in the currency of labor. Fields once bound to aristocratic demesnes now broke free into sharecropping arrangements or joint tenancy agreements that resembled early forms of capitalism. In towns, guilds revised master-apprentice contracts to entice new entrants. Skilled artisans, blacksmiths, weavers, masons, and coopers found themselves in unprecedented demand, their craftsmanship commanding higher fees. Merchant guilds funded voyages with more caution, imposing quarantine fees and insurance premiums to offset plague-related risks. Markets reopened under stricter regulations. Pilgrims and traders passed through cordoned lanes, burnt embers at town gates warding off mischievous spirits. Municipal councils wrote ordinances requiring homeowners to sweep the front of their property or face fines, launching rudimentary public health campaigns centuries before germ theory would justify them. Art and literature blossomed from the ashes of destruction. The danse macabre, a motif of skeletons leading living figures to the grave, appeared on church walls and tombstones, a stark commentary on death's egalitarian reach. In illuminated manuscripts, Death and the maiden became a recurring theme. Skeletons caressed young women, reminding them that beauty and youth offered no guarantee. Giovanni Boccaccio, witnessing Florence's decimation firsthand, penned the Decameron, 10 storytellers recounting 100 tales in a secluded villa, capturing a fragile oasis of laughter and intrigue amid ruin. Petrarch wrote letters to friends bereft of kin, his missives haunted by memory and longing. Chronicles recorded miracles attributed to saints, yet they also cataloged horrors so vast they defied comprehension. Religious life fractured in the wake of unanswered prayers. Processions of flagellants wound through city streets, penitents lashing their backs in public display, convinced that extreme penance might turn aside divine wrath. The church, once seen as an unassailable fortress of faith, now appeared vulnerable. Lay movements demanded lay preaching and vernacular Bibles, sowing seeds that centuries later would sprout into the Reformation. Some Jews accused of poisoning wells faced horrific pogroms. Entire communities fled or hid in forest enclaves. The moral panic unleashed by the plague stained social fabric with distrust and scapegoating. Beyond Europe, the plague ravaged the Middle East and North Africa with equal ferocity. Cairo, then one of the world's largest cities, shrunk as markets emptied and scholars fled madrasas. Damascus's famed souks stood silent. Pilgrimages to Mecca dwindled as fear-gripped caravans traversing desert sands. The fall of population disrupted trade in spices, grain, and silk, sending shockwaves through economies from Baghdad to Granada. Islamic physicians, drawing on Abyssinian texts, performed tracheotomies and administered rosewater distillations, yet lacked the means to halt the bacterial scourge. Mosques echoed with prayers for deliverance, while Sufi mystics withdrew into silent retreat, chanting God's names as death brushed against their retreat's latticed walls. In subsequent centuries, plague would return in waves: 1520, 1629, 1665, striking towns with diminished terror but enduring persistence. Each outbreak prompted refinement of quarantine practices. Lazarettos, isolated hospitals on islands, sprang up in Venice and Marseille. Health boards emerged in port cities, inspecting ships and enforcing detention. Bills of mortality, public records counting weekly deaths by parish, formed the precursors of modern epidemiology. Language itself absorbed these shadows. Quarantine became a universal term. Plague a byword for catastrophe. Folk traditions endured in rural hamlets. Sprigs of hyssop continued to adorn doorposts. Towns maintained plague crosses at crossroads. Tales of the plague doctor, those black-clad figures with bird-like masks, haunted children's nightmares and inspired the macabre. Scholars debated the role of air, water, and phomais. Eventually, germ theory would dethrone miasma, and antibiotics would render Yersinia pestis a treatable adversary. Yet the collective memory of the 14th century Black Death remained etched in art, literature, and legend. Today, when night envelops modern cities and streetlights fade into the distance, one can close their eyes and imagine the hush that fell across plague-ravaged towns, the echo of church bells tolling for souls lost, the quiet desperation of families torn apart, the stoic faces of survivors scraping fresh clay into new bricks, and the gentle ardor of those who rebuilt with trembling hands. Even in our age of antibiotics and ventilators, the Black Death holds lessons on vulnerability, solidarity, and the tenacity of human spirit. And as this story drifts into the stillness, let its final breath be calm and measured. Close your eyes. Let the distant clang of bells fade, and surrender to the gentle whisper of history, lulling you into peaceful rest. Good night.